The cub's heart stopped twice before Lena reached the table. A mother lion staggered out of the Nevada desert at sunrise, her ribs sharp beneath her dusty coat, a dying cub hanging from her jaws. She placed him at a human's feet, then vanished back into the burning wild. For 3 weeks, no one knew if she had survived, until the day her silhouette returned on the horizon, and she was not alone. The first light of morning crept over the edge of the Nevada desert, washing Lena Hartman's small ranch in a soft, golden glow. She stood at her kitchen counter, waiting for her coffee to finish brewing, when a sound, 3 sharp, deliberate knocks, echoed through the quiet yard. At first she thought it was the wind kicking something against the fence, but the rhythm was too measured, too intentional. She froze, listening. Then it came again. Lena set her mug down and stepped onto the porch, the cool morning air brushing her face. Her eyes shifted toward the eastern fence line, where the sound had come from. Nothing moved at first, just the flicker of dawn stretching across the sand. Then she saw it. A shape, a presence. And it was staring straight back at her. A lioness stood at the fence. Not just any lioness. This one was gaunt, ribs showing through her dusty coat, and her stance trembled with exhaustion. Her amber eyes, normally fierce and commanding, burned instead with a desperate, pleading light that made Lena's breath catch. She had lived in the desert long enough to know what a healthy lioness looked like. This one looked broken. But that wasn't what made Lena's heart nearly stop. Hanging from the lioness's jaws was a small cub. His limp body swayed gently with each breath of wind. His paws twitched in erratic spasms, and a thin trail of foam clung to the fur around his mouth. The cub's eyes rolled halfway open, unfocused, fading. "Dear God," Lena whispered. The lioness didn't roar, didn't snarl, didn't take a single threatening step. Instead, she approached the fence with slow, trembling movements, as though every muscle in her body fought against the weight she carried. When she reached the wire mesh, she lowered her head and pressed her muzzle forward. Lena stepped closer, sinking to a crouch without thinking. Her instincts should have screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to put distance between her and a full-grown lioness. But something about the scene rooted her to the ground. The lioness's eyes were not the eyes of a predator. They were the eyes of a mother begging for help. "Easy, easy," Lena murmured, her voice barely more than breath. The lioness took one final step, then another. Her paws wobbled beneath her, but she kept moving until only the fence separated them. She opened her jaws with painful slowness, and the cub, weak, shaking uncontrollably, slipped from her mouth and tumbled into the dirt at Lena's feet. A soft, broken whimper pushed from his throat. Lena reached out automatically, her hands trembling as she scooped the cub up. He was burning with fever, yet shivering violently. His heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. His breathing came in shallow bursts, each one weaker than the last. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened to you?" she whispered. But before she could look up to the lioness for an answer, the mother made a sudden, jarring movement. She spun around, her body jerking as if pulled by invisible ropes of panic. Her claws tore at the sand as she staggered away from the fence, glancing back only once, with a flash of fear so sharp it stunned Lena. In that fleeting glance, Lena saw everything she needed to know. This lioness wasn't abandoning her cub. She was running back to something urgent, something terrible. "Wait," Lena called out. But the lioness was already gone, her tawny shape slipping into the rising glare of the desert sun until she was nothing but a faint shadow against the sands. Lena clutched the trembling cub against her chest, feeling the frantic pulse beating through his tiny ribcage. She could barely wrap her mind around what she had just witnessed. A wild lioness had walked up to a human, placed her dying child in that human's hands. and fled. Nothing about it was natural. Nothing about it made sense. The desert was full of predators who would rather die than get this close to a person. But this mother lion had chosen to break every instinct she possessed. Lena ran toward her house, shouting for her medical kit, her pulse racing as hard as the cub's. Behind her, the sun rose higher, painting the desert in the soft colors of morning, colors that did nothing to soften the truth she had just witnessed. A mother lion had knocked on her fence at sunrise and begged her to save the child she could not save herself. Finn's tiny body convulsed in Lena Hartman's arms as she rushed back into the house, kicking the door shut with her heel. The cub's fur, soft but soaked with fever sweat, stuck to her shirt as she laid him gently across a folded towel on the kitchen table. His paws twitched out of rhythm, one hind leg stiffening violently before collapsing like a loose string. His breaths came in sharp, irregular gasps, each one more fragile than the last. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Don't you fade on me," Lena murmured, grabbing her emergency veterinary kit from beneath the counter. She had treated countless wild animals over the years: hawks tangled in barbed wire, coyotes hit by trucks, a bobcat with a shattered shoulder. But nothing prepared her for the sight of a dying lion cub less than 2 months old, delivered to her by his own mother. Finn let out a thin, broken sound, something between a whimper and a gasp. It was the kind of sound an animal makes when its body is failing faster than it can fight. His eyes flickered open, revealing pale amber irises clouded by shock. They slid past her, unfocused, as if he were looking for something that wasn't in the room. Then his head jerked forward in a full-body seizure, and Lena leaned over him, steadying his trembling form with both hands. "It's okay. I've got you," she whispered, though her voice shook. She could feel heat radiating off him, heat that didn't belong in any living creature. A fever like this wasn't from dehydration or a simple infection. It was something deeper, uglier, more aggressive. She pushed a thermometer under his foreleg, barely daring to breathe as she waited for the digital beep. When it sounded, she glanced at the reading, and her chest tightened. The temperature was dangerously high, the kind of number that meant organs would soon begin to shut down. "Come on. Come on." Lena reached for a small jar of rubbing alcohol, soaking a cloth and pressing it gently against Finn's paws and ears, trying to draw out the heat. The cub jerked again, foam bubbling at the edges of his mouth. That's when she spotted it. Tiny tremors running down the sides of his ribs, not from cold, but from neurological distress. She had seen it in poisoned animals before. Not the kind that ate something bad and got sick, the kind that ingested something toxic enough to shut down their nervous system. She reached beneath the table for the oxygen tank she kept for emergencies. Her hand steadied as she fitted the mask over Finn's muzzle, adjusting the flow. The soft hiss of oxygen filled the room, but Finn's breathing didn't ease. His chest rose unevenly, struggling to keep rhythm. Another seizure rippled through him, his spine arched, legs kicking air. Lena held him as gently as she could, keeping him from hurting himself. "You poor little thing. What did you eat out there?" she whispered. The cub couldn't answer, but Lena's mind rolled rapidly through possibilities. Death Valley wasn't just dry, it was unpredictable. Animals desperate for water drank from contaminated pockets left behind by old mining operations. Scavengers ate carcasses laced with toxins. A lioness in drought would take whatever she could find. Which meant this cub, Finn, might have eaten something his body wasn't built to handle. The seizures slowed for a moment, just long enough for Finn to gasp another shallow breath. Lena wiped the foam from his mouth and reached for her saline solution. She inserted a small IV needle into the thin skin of his foreleg, praying she could find the vein quickly enough. "Come on, baby. Give me something to work with," she whispered, guiding the needle until she saw a small flash of blood. She taped it in place and began the slow drip of fluids. Finn's body sagged as the seizure loosened its grip on him. His breathing steadied, not strong, but no longer frantic. Lena leaned close, her face inches from his tiny nose, watching his chest rise and fall like a shrinking flame. "Hang in there, Finn. Your mama risked everything to get you here," she said softly. Her words echoed through the room, and for the first time since Arya had appeared at the fence, Lena allowed herself to think about the lioness again. The way Arya's body trembled, the sunken ribs, the frantic, haunted look in her eyes, the way she had dropped Finn and run as if chased by ghosts. Something was terribly wrong out there, something more than poisoned water, something that had driven a mother lion to break every instinct she possessed and trust a human with her dying cub. Finn let out a low moan and curled toward Lena's hand, seeking warmth or maybe comfort. She brushed her thumb along his cheek, her voice softening even more. "You're not alone now, I promise you that." Another tremor passed through his body. Not a seizure this time, just exhaustion, or fear, or something deeper she couldn't name. The cub's breaths fluttered like paper in a storm. Lena increased the oxygen flow, whispering steady reassurance. Minutes ticked by, each one stretched thin by tension. Outside, the desert awakened. Doves cooed. The wind hummed through the fence, and somewhere far away, a truck rumbled along the highway. But inside this tiny kitchen, time moved differently. It moved with each shaky rise of Finn's chest, each tremor that passed through his paws, each second Lena feared would be his last. Just when she thought he might slip away completely, Finn's breathing steadied again, barely, but enough to pull him back from the edge. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're a fighter," she murmured, "just like your mama." She couldn't help but look toward the window, toward the place Arya had stood. The lioness was gone, swallowed by the desert heat. But her desperation lingered, thick enough to feel in the air. "Where did she go?" Lena whispered. The question chilled her. Finn's mother had not left out of abandonment. She had left because something waited for her in the desert. Something she couldn't ignore. And as Lena adjusted the oxygen mask on Finn's tiny face, she felt a cold certainty spreading through her chest. Whatever Arya had gone back to, it wasn't safe. It wasn't simple. And it wasn't over. 12 hours earlier, long before the sun had risen over Lena Hartman's ranch, the Nevada desert lay silent beneath a sky the color of cooled ash. Nothing moved except the hot wind dragging across the cracked earth. No birds, no insects, no rustle of distant prey. Only heat, hunger, and the weight of a relentless drought that had stretched on for months. Arya moved through that silence like a ghost. Her paws kicked up thin trails of dust as she pushed forward, her ribs showing with every breath. She wasn't hunting because she wanted to. She was hunting because she had to. At her heels, 3 small lion cubs, Finn, Marley, and Willow, tried to keep up, their legs trembling with exhaustion. They were barely old enough to walk long distances, yet the desert had forced them into an adult's struggle to survive. The sun was still low, but even its early light carried heat. The kind of heat that took strength from the bones of young animals. Finn stumbled first. He was the smallest, always trailing behind, always the one Arya nudged closer when the wind grew sharp or the sand grew too hot. He let out a tiny sound, no louder than the squeak of a door hinge, and Arya immediately turned, nudging him with her muzzle. She could not stop. Not now, not with her cubs starving. But she slowed her pace, urging him gently forward as she scanned the empty plain. She had covered 7 miles since dawn, following the faint scent of a wild burrow. The trail was weak, drifting on currents of dust, but it was all she had. A mother lion could survive hunger. Her cubs could not. Behind her, Marley and Willow followed closely, their movements shaky. Marley's belly rumbled, and Willow's tail dragged in the sand. Arya's heart clenched. She had known many seasons of scarcity, but never one like this, never a stretch of land so empty it felt cursed. At last, she found what she'd been searching for. The burrow lay beneath the shade of a dead mesquite tree, its flanks barely rising. It was alive but failing, thin, ribs jutting out, foam dried around its lips. Whatever had poisoned it had drained its strength until even lifting its head seemed impossible. Arya did not trust easy food, but she had 3 starving cubs, and the desert had given her no other choice. With a swift movement, she ended the burrow's suffering. Finn, Marley, and Willow approached with eager whimpers, circling the carcass. Arya watched them, her tail flicking in gentle reassurance. She nudged Finn forward. He needed food more than the others. His legs were wobbling, his breaths shallow. The cubs tore into the meat with desperate urgency, tiny teeth working quickly. Arya waited until the children had eaten their fill before she allowed herself a bite. It was instinct, older than memory, older than the desert itself. The young eat first. For 15 blessed minutes, the world grew quiet again. The cubs, full for the first time in 2 days, sprawled in the shade, licking their paws, making soft chirps to each other. Willow playfully pawed Marley's ear. Finn curled against Arya's foreleg, the rise and fall of his breathing gentle and steady. Arya let her eyes close for just a moment, and then Finn's body jerked. At first, she thought he was dreaming, his paws kicking lightly, as cubs often do. But then his back arched sharply. His head whipped sideways, his mouth opened wide, a choked cry escaping. His tiny legs stiffened, then kicked violently. Arya shot upright. Finn convulsed again, harder this time, his entire body seizing. Willow scrambled backward in fear, and Marley flattened himself against the sand. Arya circled her cub, nudging, licking, trying to calm him, but nothing helped. His jaws clenched, foam bubbling at the edges, his breaths turning shallow and ragged. He cried, a sound of pure panic, and Arya felt her heart fracture. Then she saw it. Willow's paws trembled. Marley stumbled. Both cubs drooled, though not nearly as severely as Finn. Their symptoms were faint, but they were there. Whatever they had eaten was poisoned. Arya's body went cold even under the rising sun. She nudged Finn again, watching in horror as another seizure racked his small form. Willow whimpered softly, trying to approach him, but Marley nudged her back as if sensing something was wrong. Arya's nose brushed the burrow's hide. The scent of decay hit her, not the natural scent of a dying animal, but something acrid, metallic, bitter. A poisoned water source, a poisoned burrow, a poisoned meal. Something that should have saved her cubs was now killing them. Finn convulsed again, harder, then lay limp for several seconds, chest struggling for breath. Arya nudged him violently, refusing to let him slip away, her panic rising with every jitter of his paws. She looked at Marley and Willow. Their tremors continued, but they remained standing. Finn was losing the battle. Arya stood still, torn in a way nature never intended a mother to be. She needed to protect all 3 cubs. She needed to fix a mistake she didn't even know she'd made. She needed more than her own strength. Her instincts screamed that she was running out of time. The desert around her was still empty, but Arya felt the presence of danger all the same. Coyotes roamed these plains. Pumas prowled the rocky ridges. Even vultures watched from above, waiting for weakness. And Finn was as weak as a creature could be and still breathe. Arya paced in a tight circle, her tail lashing. She nudged Finn again, licking his face desperately. Another seizure struck him, a violent, jerking motion that made Willow cry out, and Marley press himself flat to the ground. Arya lifted her head and scanned the horizon, her eyes burning with fear. Somewhere, far away, she remembered the faint scent of a human who once touched her with gentle hands, someone who smelled of medicine and calm. She remembered pain. She remembered healing. She remembered trust. Finn convulsed again, and that memory crystallized into a decision. Arya placed her muzzle around his fragile body. His legs twitched against her fur, but she held him as gently as she could. She turned to Marley and Willow, chirping softly, one of the few sounds lions used for reassurance. Then, with a deep breath that hurt all the way into her bones, Arya prepared to leave them. Finn was dying now. Marley and Willow were sick, but still standing. She had to choose. And in that cruel, sun-scorched desert, Arya made a choice no mother should ever face. She carried Finn away. She carried him toward the faint scent of the only human she had ever trusted. And she prayed, because even lions pray in their own way, that she could return in time to save the others. Behind her, the desert swallowed her footprints. Ahead of her, the sun rose higher, ready to burn whatever hope she had left. Arya ran only a dozen yards before her instincts yanked her to a halt. Finn dangled from her jaws, barely conscious, his body twitching as poison traveled deeper through his system. But behind her, hidden in that narrow crevice of stone and brush, Marley and Willow waited, trembling, sick, and completely alone. The wind carried their faint cries, thin and frightened, brushing past her ears like memories begging her not to leave. Arya turned back, torn in half. The desert stretched in every direction, a vast plain of heat and emptiness. For a moment she stood completely still, fighting the panic rising inside her. She was a lioness, built for strength, speed, survival, but nothing in nature prepared a mother for a moment like this. Finn convulsed, a sharp, violent jerk that snapped her attention downward. His small paw twitched against her cheek, then went limp. His breath rattled, shallow and intermittent. His heart fluttered like a trapped insect. The poison had him in its grip, and every second she hesitated tightened that grip further. But Marley and Willow, her mind went back to them. Two small bodies pressed together inside the crevice, their paws trembling, their bellies empty, their breath shallow. Willow had whimpered, a soft, broken sound Arya felt all the way down to the bone. Marley had tried to stand taller, as if protecting his sister, but his legs had quaked beneath him. They were alive now, but the desert offered no mercy to the weak. Not to lion cubs. Not to anything. Arya paced in a tight, frantic circle, sand spraying beneath her paws. Finn hung motionless except for the faintest quiver along his ribs. When she lowered him to the ground to check his breath, his body rolled limply onto the sand. His eyes half opened, unfocused and glazed with fever. He tried to mew, but only a strained wheeze escaped him. Arya's heart clenched at the sight. She nudged him softly, licking the top of his head, willing him to stay. But his head lolled sideways, his mouth opening in silent struggle. A thin string of foam slid from his lips. He was dying. Not in hours. Not later. Now. She looked back toward the crevice. Marley and Willow were sick, yes, but their symptoms had been mild. They still had strength to stand, to curl up together, to breathe steadily. The poison had touched them, but it had not yet rooted deep enough to take hold. Finn didn't have that advantage. His body was smaller, his constitution weaker, his poison faster. Arya felt the weight of the moment settle around her like the scorching desert heat. This was the moment that every mother, lion or human, prayed would never come. A choice so cruel, so impossible, that it carved itself into the soul. She could stay with all three, comfort them, protect them. But Finn would die within minutes. And when night came, Marley and Willow might die too. She could carry Finn to the human, the one with gentle hands and the scent of healing. But the journey would take hours. Hours Marley and Willow might not survive without her. Either choice cut her heart in half. Finn shuddered again, a sharp convulsion that pulled her back to him. His breathing faltered, stopped, then restarted in a thin gasp. Arya pressed her forehead against his side, her whiskers trembling. She could feel how close he was to slipping away. She lifted her head and stared across the desert, toward the faint memory of the ranch. The human. The woman who had once saved her. The only creature she had ever allowed close enough to touch her wounds. The only one she trusted with something as precious as her own life. Could that same woman save Finn? Could she save him from poison this strong? Could she do it in time? A harsh gust of wind swept across the sands, carrying with it the distant scent of coyotes. Not here yet, but close, hungry, desperate, drawn by weakness. Arya's ears flattened. Her cubs were more than vulnerable. They were targets. She had minutes, maybe less, before the desert's scavengers began circling the place she'd left Marley and Willow. Time wasn't just running out. It was falling apart beneath her paws. Finn gasped again, a small, pitiful sound that sliced through her indecision. Arya made her choice. She picked Finn up in her jaws, cradling him as if he were made of smoke. She turned away from the crevice, away from the two cubs who needed her, and forced her legs to move. Every step was agony. Every foot of distance was betrayal. She felt as if she were leaving pieces of her soul behind with each paw print. She ran. The desert wind whipped against her face, drying the moisture around her eyes. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. Her muscles burned. Her lungs screamed. Sand scraped between her pads, slicing into tender skin. Still, she ran. Because Finn's breaths were getting weaker. Because Marley and Willow had a chance. He did not. Because a mother, even a lioness, must sometimes choose the unthinkable. Halfway across the scorching flat, she stopped suddenly. Her body trembled with the force of her own doubt. For a split second, instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back to Marley and Willow, to gather them close and protect them all until the end. Her claws dug into the sand. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The silence pressed in on her. But then Finn twitched in her mouth. Just a small tremor, but enough. Enough to remind her why she had left, why she could not turn back, why she had to keep going. She lifted her head, squared her shoulders, and surged forward again, letting the desert swallow her tears. If she died trying to save him, so be it. If the desert punished her for this choice, she would bear it. If Marley and Willow never forgave her, she would carry that wound for the rest of her days. A mother's heart is a battlefield. Arya ran with hers torn open. Behind her, the crevice grew smaller, swallowed by sand and distance. Ahead of her, the horizon shimmered with heat and the faint memory of a woman who once brought her back from the edge of death. Arya prayed the human could do the same for Finn. She ran toward that hope, knowing it was fragile, knowing it might already be too late, but knowing, above all, that she could not let her baby die without a fight. And so she kept running, each desperate stride carving her choice into the desert itself. A mother's impossible gamble, sealed beneath the rising sun. But Arya could not leave without securing what little hope remained for her other two cubs. Marley and Willow were sick, hungry, and terrified, and even if their symptoms were mild compared to Finn's, the desert was no place for unguarded young lives. The poison wasn't the only danger stalking them. Predators followed weakness like shadows. Arya slowed, stopping in a patch of dead brush. Her chest heaved, every breath scraping her lungs raw. Finn hung from her jaws, limp except for the faint twitch of his paw. His fur was hot, unnaturally hot, with fever. His small body trembled against her tongue, as if struggling not to fall apart. She lowered him gently onto a flat stone, shaded by a jutting rock. Finn let out a thin sound, the kind that broke her heart every time it slipped from his throat. His eyes rolled back, only the whites visible. She nudged him once, just to reassure him, reassure herself, that he was still clinging to life. Then Arya turned and ran back toward the place where Marley and Willow waited. The desert wind picked up, rolling sand like smoke across the dunes. Every direction looked the same, but Arya remembered the landmarks. An old dead mesquite, a half-buried boulder shaped like a crouching animal. The faint scent of her cubs carried on the hot current. She followed every trace with the determination of a mother who refused to lose more than she already had. When she reached the crevice, her heart lurched. Marley and Willow were pressed together inside the cave's narrow entrance, eyes wide, bodies trembling. Willow let out a cry when she saw her mother, a sound halfway between relief and fear. Marley tried to move toward Arya, but his legs shook beneath him, and he collapsed back against his sister. Arya stepped inside just far enough to brush her muzzle across both cubs. She smelled the sickness on them, bitter, sharp, unnatural. She groomed their faces with slow, calming strokes, trying to ease their panic. But time was slipping through her paws like sand. She could feel it. She could taste it. The sun pushed higher, heating the rocks until they burned to the touch. In hours, the desert would be unbearable. And by then, Finn might already be gone. The thought made Arya's stomach wrench. She nudged Marley and Willow deeper into the crevice. The space wasn't large, just a natural hollow created by a collapsed section of rock, but it was enough to shelter the cubs from the worst of the desert heat. Its narrow mouth made it difficult for larger predators to reach them, but not impossible. Arya scanned the desert beyond the crevice. Coyotes could slip through cracks. Snakes could slither beneath brush. Even vultures would circle overhead, waiting for death. She needed to do more, much more, if she was going to leave them for the hours it would take to reach the human. A low rumble trembled in her throat as she turned and searched the ground for anything she could use. She dragged fallen branches toward the entrance, dry, brittle mesquite limbs stripped clean by the sun. Her powerful paws scraped loose sand into the mouth of the crevice, pushing it into a mound. When she finished, the entrance looked almost like part of the landscape, half collapsed, covered in brush and debris. A place no animal would think to search unless they knew what lay inside. Marley and Willow watched from the shadows, their eyes reflecting fear, confusion, and a kind of helpless trust that made Arya's chest ache. They were too young to understand why she was doing this, too young to know what it meant to leave them. Arya nudged them again, reassuring them with soft chirps. Marley lifted his head and licked her muzzle weakly. Willow pressed her tiny paw against Arya's foreleg. She leaned down, touching her forehead to theirs. Then she stepped back. The cubs whimpered, their small voices filled with confusion and pleading. Arya froze, every instinct telling her to stay, to cradle them, to protect them until whatever came next took them all together. But Finn would die without help. She whispered one more soft chirp to calm them, then turned away before her resolve could shatter. She walked several yards from the crevice and deliberately circled the area, leaving false trails leading east, away from the hidden entrance. She dragged her paws through the sand, masking the cub's scent with her own. She rubbed her body against bushes, leaving her musk where predators would pick it up. It was all she could do, and it would have to be enough. When she returned to where she'd left Finn, she found him exactly as she feared. Worse. His tiny body twitched uncontrollably. His sides heaved for breath, each gasp more ragged than the last. His eyes were half-closed, unfocused, pupils shrunken into pale slivers. Foam clung to the fur around his mouth. Arya stepped close, her breath shaking. She licked the top of his head, tasting the bitterness of poison on his fur. Finn shivered weakly at her touch, then went still again. No more time. No more hesitation. No more choices. Arya gathered Finn in her jaws, holding him as gently as she would a newborn. She lifted her head toward the horizon. The scent of the human, faint but familiar, rode the desert wind, guiding her like a memory. Finn's breath fluttered against her tongue, light, weak, fading. Arya tightened her grip, not enough to harm, just enough to anchor him to her. Then she ran. Her body moved on instinct, driven by fear and fierce determination. The sun blazed overhead, burning the sand beneath her paws. Heat shimmered in waves. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Every foot of ground she covered felt like another stitch in the fragile thread that tied her to Finn's survival. Every step away from Marley and Willow tore at something deep inside her, leaving wounds the desert wind would never heal. But she ran anyway, because a mother runs toward even the smallest chance of saving her child. The desert stretched wide around her, merciless and silent, holding its breath as a lioness raced against death itself. And behind her, hidden in a crevice sealed with sand and hope, 2 cubs waited for the moment she would return, if she returned at all. Arya ran into the heart of the desert, with Finn cradled carefully in her jaws, his tiny body limp against her tongue. The morning heat had already begun to climb, rising in shimmering waves that distorted the horizon. With each stride, her muscles screamed, her lungs struggled for air, and her paws pounded blistering sand that tore new cracks into her pads. But she never slowed, never faltered. She ran as if the sun itself were chasing her, because in a way, it was. At 42 degrees and climbing, the desert didn't just test the strong, it killed the weak. And Finn, burning with fever, shaking with poison, was as fragile as a flicker of flame in the wind. Arya knew this with the instinct of a mother who had survived too much loss already. Her first litter had been taken by hyenas, her second by drought. She had learned, painfully, that the desert never offered second chances. But today, she refused to let that truth win. Finn's breath fluttered against her tongue, irregular, shallow, frighteningly soft. Every few minutes, his body jerked in a small seizure, and she was forced to stop, lowering him gently to the ground so she could check whether he still breathed. Each time she did, she nudged him, waiting for the weak lift of his chest. Each time she felt relief mixed with terror. He was alive, but barely. Arya lifted him again and continued forward. The distance between the crevice and the human's ranch stretched endlessly before her. 8 miles in normal weather was manageable. But under this cruel sun, injured, dehydrated, and carrying a dying cub, it felt like a lifetime. She kept going. As the sun climbed higher, the light turned harsh and white, pressing down on her like a weight. Her golden coat, meant to camouflage her among grasses that no longer existed, soaked up the heat until her body threatened to overheat. She panted through clenched jaws, unable to release Finn long enough to cool herself properly. Her vision blurred. The world tilted, but she planted one paw in front of the other, driven by something older than instinct. Love. By midday, the desert landscape began to change. The flat dunes gave way to scattered boulders and patches of hardy sagebrush. Arya recognized the path. She had walked it once before, when she'd been the one in need of saving. Her memory guided her toward the faint scent of humans, water, and steel. She pressed forward, stumbling with fatigue. At one point, her legs buckled. She collapsed onto her side, sand burning against her ribs. Finn rolled from her jaws and landed softly beside her, his tiny body twitching with another seizure. Arya forced herself upright, trembling violently. She nosed Finn, licking his face, desperate to keep him conscious. His breathing was faint. So faint she had to press her ear against his chest to feel the tiny flutter. If she rested more than a moment, he would die. Arya pushed herself back onto her feet. She lifted Finn again, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through her shoulders. The blistering ground tore new wounds into her pads, leaving small dots of blood in her trail. But she didn't look back. Her focus stayed fixed on the memory of that ranch. The silver fence, the scent of water, the human whose hands had once cleaned her wounds and spoken to her in a soft, steady voice. she ran. Hours passed in a blur of heat and grit. The sky above her shifted from pale yellow to blinding white. Her shadow shrank beneath her claws. Sweat dripped from her muzzle and vanished instantly into the sand. She felt her strength thinning, shredding like threads pulled apart. Still, she ran. Finn's body grew heavier against her jaws, not because he was gaining strength, but because hers was fading. He jerked suddenly, his limbs stiffening. Arya lowered him again, nudging quickly, waiting for breath. His chest rose once, twice, then paused for a long, terrifying moment before lifting again in a weak gasp. Arya let out a soft, desperate growl. No more delays. She had to reach the human soon. She gathered him and pushed forward again, her stride uneven but determined. The landscape ahead shimmered with heat mirages, bending and twisting the distance so she could no longer tell if the ranch was near or impossibly far. But then, finally, she caught it. The faint scent of steel, the smell of water from a cooling trough, and underneath it all, the familiar scent of the woman, Lena. Arya's ears pricked forward. Her heart pounded with new urgency. She staggered up a small rise, the world spinning around her. Beyond it stretched the fenced yard she remembered, a lattice of metal that glinted under the harsh sun. She had made it. Barely. But she had made it. She took one step down the slope, then another. Her legs shook beneath her. Her vision dimmed around the edges. But she could see the ranch now, could hear faint sounds, a dog barking in the distance, the soft hum of a generator. The human was near. Hope was near. With the last reserves of her strength, Arya pushed herself down the hill. She reached the fence and stopped, her body swaying, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Finn dangled motionless from her jaws. Arya lowered him onto the ground and placed her paw beside him as if to anchor him to life. Then she looked toward the house. She opened her jaws and roared, not the roar of a predator, but a call filled with fear, exhaustion, and pleading, a summons, a prayer, a mother's final cry for help. The sound echoed across the ranch, stirring dust from the fence line. It carried through open windows, across fields, and straight into Lena Hartman's kitchen. Arya stood trembling beside her dying cub, her body battered and bleeding, her strength nearly gone. She had done everything a mother could do. Now all she could do was wait, and hope the human she trusted would hear her call. Lena Hartman nearly dropped the syringe she was preparing when the roar hit her kitchen window like a tremor. Not a territorial roar, not a challenge. This one was ragged, shaking, almost cracked in the middle. A plea. A sound no lioness should ever make unless the world was falling apart around her. She froze, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Then she ran. She pushed through the back door, boots hitting the dry earth as she sprinted toward the eastern fence, the same place she'd found the lioness hours before. The heat was harsher now, the sun beating down like a hammer. But Lena barely felt it. Instinct, raw and urgent, pulled her forward. As she rounded the last corner of the barn, her breath caught. There, slumped against the fence as though held upright by sheer will alone, was the lioness, Arya. Her once sleek coat was ragged, dusty, clinging to ribs that rose and fell in uneven waves. Her eyes, normally bright and fierce, were glassy, unfocused from exhaustion. Her paws were cracked and bleeding. She looked like she had run through all of Death Valley without stopping. But none of that stopped Lena cold. It was the cub. Finn lay in the sand, limp as a discarded blanket, his chest barely moving. His tail twitched with a delayed spasm, a ghost of pain running through him. Foam clung to his lips, drying in the heat. His pupils were pinpoints. "Jesus," Lena whispered, already moving. Arya watched her closely, but didn't move, not even an inch. No growl, no threat, no instinctive step between her cub and the human. She simply stared with an expression Lena had only ever seen in human mothers. Terror wrapped in hope. It's okay, girl, Lena said softly. I'm here. I'm here. She knelt beside Finn and touched his neck. The cub was burning, far worse than before. His heartbeat was faint, fluttering unevenly under her fingers. His fur smelled bitter, confirming what she suspected earlier. Poison. Something neurotoxic. Something that had spread fast. Arya leaned in, touching the cub's head with her muzzle, then looking at Lena again. Lena knew that look. She had seen it once before, 18 months earlier. A memory surfaced in sharp detail, one she hadn't allowed herself to revisit in a long time. She was hiking near the ridgeline, checking trail cameras, when she heard a strangled cry echo across the rocks. She followed the sound and found a lioness collapsed in the shade, her front paw swollen grotesquely around a wire snare left behind by an illegal trapper. The wire bit deep into the flesh, cutting off circulation, already infected. The lioness had been lying there for at least a day, unable to move. Her eyes were full of pain, yet she didn't charge, didn't snap her jaws. She just stared up at Lena with the same look Finn's mother wore now, pleading without words. Lena had acted on instinct then, too. She removed her jacket, spoke softly, and approached inch by inch. The lioness didn't fight. Not even when Lena placed her hands on the injured paw. Not even when she cut through the wire and cleaned the wound. Not even when Lena splinted the leg with the supplies she carried for emergencies. The lioness's breathing slowed. Her eyes softened. For a moment, just one. Lena and the wild creature had shared a fragile thread of trust. That lioness now stood before her again, older, thinner, battered by the desert, but unmistakable. Arya remembered her, and she had come back. Lena swallowed thickly and reached for Finn. Arya didn't resist. She stepped aside, collapsing into the sand, as though her strength had finally snapped. Her sides trembled. Her ears drooped. She watched every movement Lena made, her gaze tracing the IV line, the oxygen mask, the trembling of Finn's flank. Lena lifted the cub and hurried toward her house. She looked back once to see if Arya followed. She didn't. The lioness stayed by the fence, watching, barely upright. Her entire body seemed frozen between fear and faith. "Come on, sweet boy," Lena whispered as she carried Finn inside. "You hold on. Your mama brought you this far. Now it's my turn." She placed Finn on the towel again, checked the IV, and gently fitted the oxygen mask back over his muzzle. His breath hitched, shallow, thin, dangerously uneven. The cub's eyes rolled beneath half-lowered lids. His paws twitched. A tremor ran up his spine. Lena grabbed her phone, dialing a colleague at the wildlife center. "Mark, it's Lena. I've got a lion cub in neurotoxic shock. Severe. He needs flushing and sedation. I don't have time to transport him." Mark cursed under his breath on the other end. "Do what you can. I'll prep the station. But, Lena, cub's that young." "I know," she snapped. "Just be ready." She hung up and returned to Finn's side, wiping the foam from his mouth. She reached for activated charcoal, drawing the liquid into a small syringe without a moment's hesitation. "I need you to fight," she murmured softly. "Your mama clawed her way across the desert to give you a chance. Don't waste it, kid." Behind her, through the open window, the faint shape of Arya was visible. Still sitting, still waiting, her body trembling in the heat. Her eyes never left the house. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't hunting. She wasn't protecting territory. She was praying. Lena's throat tightened. She looked at Finn, then back at the desert lion sitting like a statue of hope carved from gold and dust. "It's okay," Lena whispered through the window. "I won't let him die." She didn't know if Arya understood the words, but Arya didn't move. Neither did Lena. The desert wind slowed, as though holding its breath. And in the quiet of that moment, fragile, trembling, The lives of a mother lion and her dying cub were placed entirely in human hands. Inside the kitchen, Lena worked with the urgency of someone who knew every second mattered. Finn's pulse fluttered beneath her fingertips like a candle fighting against the dark. His chest rose and fell in uneven shudders, each breath a fragile promise that threatened to break apart. Lena steadied her hands, pushing away fear the way she had learned to during emergencies. One breath, one choice, one action at a time. She inserted a fresh line of fluids into the cub's tiny foreleg, adjusting the flow to combat the rapid dehydration caused by the poison. Finn let out a dry, choking gasp, his limbs jerking uncontrollably. Lena lifted his head, supporting his neck gently as she administered a measured dose of anticonvulsant medication. His body resisted at first, twitching, rejecting, but slowly, the tremors dulled. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "Fight with me." While the house filled with the soft hiss of oxygen and the rhythmic drip of the IV, the desert outside simmered with another kind of battle. One Arya had no idea was unfolding. Miles away, back at the hidden crevice sealed with sand and hope, Marley and Willow stirred weakly in the dim shade. The heat of the day had grown oppressive, pressing against the rock walls like a physical force. The cubs whimpered softly, searching instinctively for the warmth and steady breath of their mother. But she was gone. And the desert does not forgive absence. A distant rustling sound drifted across the dunes, soft at first, then unmistakable. The low, drifting conversation of coyotes. Their yips and barks carried across the blistering sand, creeping closer with each passing minute. Marley lifted his head, ears twitching. Willow pressed against him, trembling. Outside the crevice, the coyotes appeared like shadows peeled from the landscape. 4 of them, thin, hungry, desperate. Their eyes gleamed with cunning as they sniffed the air, catching the scent of something alive, something young, something undefended. They crept closer. One coyote sniffed along the camouflaged entrance, its claws dragging grooves in the sand. It let out a sharp bark, calling the others to attention. Marley whimpered, his tiny claws scraping against the rock as he pushed himself deeper into the shadows. Willow huddled behind him, both cubs shaking so violently the sand beneath them rustled. Inside Lena's home, Finn let out a sudden whine, a high, fragile sound that sliced through the air. Lena glanced toward the window, half expecting to see Arya standing inches away. But the lioness was still slumped by the fence, her sides heaving with exhaustion. She had not moved, not once. "Hold on, kid," Lena murmured, brushing Finn's forehead with her thumb. "I'm not letting you slip away." She returned to her work, adjusting the oxygen mask, administering charcoal to bind the toxins, checking the cub's heartbeat. The steady rhythm of her actions brought focus back to her mind. She knew the signs of organ failure, knew the tipping point when a body could no longer fight back. Finn was close, too close, but he was still here, and as long as he breathed, she refused to give up. Back in the desert, the coyotes began scratching at the buried entrance. Their claws pulled away sand, brush, and scattered pebbles. The sound reverberated through the crevice, scrape, 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 shaking loose tiny particles of dust that drifted down onto Marley and Willow's heads. Willow stifled a cry, pressing her body deeper into the rock. Marley tried to curl protectively around her, but his limbs trembled fiercely. One of the coyotes growled, pushing its nose against the narrowing barrier. The hollow echoed with its hot breath. The cubs froze, barely daring to blink. Meanwhile, miles away, Lena noticed that Finn's seizures had slowed. His muscles twitched, but the violent spasms had eased into weaker jerks. His breathing, though still labored, no longer stumbled as frequently. A sliver of hope slipped into her chest. "That's it, sweetheart," she murmured. "You stay with me. Your mama's right outside waiting." As if sensing her voice, Finn's eyes fluttered open. just a crack. Amber glinted faintly beneath heavy lids. He didn't focus. He didn't recognize her. But the fact that he could open his eyes at all sent Lena's heart racing. "Good boy," she whispered. Outside, Arya lifted her head. Her ears twitched, catching the faint sound of her cub's voice carried through the open window. The smallest whine, barely audible, but unmistakable. She dragged herself upright, swaying, gathering the last of her strength to stand guard at the fence. But she wasn't alone out there. From the ridge beyond Lena's property, a distant howl drifted toward the ranch, a signal from the same coyote pack prowling near Marley and Willow. Arya lifted her head higher, her muscles tightening instinctively. She recognized the call. She knew danger. She knew hunger. And she knew the desert always tested the weakest first. Back at the crevice, the coyotes dug deeper. One managed to wedge its snout between two stones, pushing harder. The entrance widened by inches. Marley and Willow whimpered again, curling together in desperate silence. Their tiny hearts beat frantically. But just as the coyote shoved its paw deeper, a sudden thunder of hoofbeats shook the ground. A gray blur slammed into the nearest predator, sending it tumbling across the sand with a shocked yelp. Greytooth. The old wild burrow Arya once spared, now charging like a storm given form. His hooves crashed down, kicking up sand as he brayed fiercely, ears pinned back, teeth bared. The coyotes scattered, confused and startled. One tried to circle behind him, but Greytooth swung with a precise strike, driving it back with a crack that echoed through the dunes. The coyote pack regrouped, growling. But Greytooth planted himself between them and the crevice, standing guard like a weathered sentinel carved from stone and memory. Inside the hidden hollow, Marley and Willow stared through narrow cracks in the rocks. They didn't understand the sacrifice unfolding outside. They didn't know why the burrow fought for them. But the desert remembers kindness. And so did Greytooth. 2 battles. One for a life in human hands. One for 2 small lives in the shadows of stone. And while Finn fought for breath in Lena's kitchen, his siblings fought for existence beneath the desert sun, unaware that their fate and his were tied together by the single thread of a mother's desperate hope. Greytooth's hooves struck the sand with thunderous force as he lunged at the nearest coyote, driving it back with a blow so fierce it sent the predator tumbling in a spray of dust. The old burro stood tall despite his age, his gray coat shimmering with sweat under the brutal sun. His ears pinned flat against his skull as he brayed, a raw, furious sound that echoed across the dunes like the cry of something ancient and unyielding. The coyotes skidded to a halt several yards away, regrouping. Dust swirled around their paws as they circled, trying to find an opening. 4 pairs of hungry eyes watched Greytooth with growing frustration. They were thin, desperate, and running on instincts sharpened by months of drought. A burrow alone was a challenge, but not impossible prey. And somewhere beneath that pile of brush and sand, they knew something smaller waited, something far easier to kill. The pack leader, a rangy female with scars across her muzzle, growled low, signaling the others. They moved in tandem, splitting to flank Greytooth. One darted left, another right, the remaining 2 approaching head-on, mouths open, teeth flashing in the glare. Greytooth didn't retreat. The old burro stomped forward, meeting the first attacker with a sideways kick that cracked against the coyote's ribs. The predator yelped, stumbling away. But the second coyote lunged from behind, jaws snapping at Greytooth's hind flank. Its teeth grazed flesh, leaving a shallow cut. Greytooth spun sharply, rearing up, hooves slashing through the air. The coyote ducked away, but it bought the others time. They advanced again, relentless. Inside the crevice, Marley and Willow curled deeper into the narrow shadows. Marley pressed himself in front of Willow, his small body trembling with fear and weakness. Willow's eyes were wide, her belly heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. They could hear everything: the scrape of paws, the thud of hooves, the snarls, the grunts of impact. Every sound vibrated through the rock walls around them. Willow whimpered. Marley nudged her with his nose, a silent plea to stay quiet. Outside, the battle intensified. Greytooth swung his head violently, teeth snapping at a coyote that lunged too close. He managed to clamp onto the predator's shoulder for the briefest moment, but his age showed in the weakness of his grip. The coyote twisted free, snarling, blood staining its fur. Greytooth staggered, already breathing hard. If he fell, nothing would stand between the cubs and the pack. As the largest coyote lunged again, Greytooth braced himself and charged. His hooves thundered against the cracked earth as he barreled forward, knocking the predator aside. The coyote rolled twice, leaving a trail in the sand, but quickly scrambled back to its feet. Greytooth swayed, nearly falling. The pack saw it. They sensed the failing strength, and this time they didn't hesitate. All four predators rushed at once. Greytooth brayed loudly, calling on whatever spirit or memory had driven him to protect this place. Whether he understood the stakes or simply remembered the lioness who once spared him, no creature could say. But in that moment, he stood tall, refusing to abandon Marley and Willow. He planted his hooves, refused to yield, and kicked with everything he had. One coyote took a blow to the jaw that sent it spinning backward. Another dodged beneath him, snapping at his legs. Greytooth bucked wildly, hooves connecting with skull and rib, but fatigue dragged at him. Blood darkened his flank from fresh scratches. His legs trembled beneath him. Inside the crevice, the cubs huddled together, eyes wide, ears pinned flat. Willow let out a soft cry she couldn't contain. The sound was faint, but one of the coyotes heard it. Its head snapped toward the camouflaged entrance. It growled low, directing the others with a single flick of its tail. They shifted their attention. They knew where the real prey was. Greytooth staggered forward, trying to intercept them, but his strength was nearly gone. The lead coyote dug at the dirt, claws flinging sand aside. The entrance widened by inches. Marley and Willow shrank back, pressing themselves against the cold stone. Their tiny paws scraped against the floor as they tried to disappear into the shadows. Greytooth brayed again, painfully, desperately, and lunged. His hooves crashed down inches from the digging predator, sending a spray of dust upward. The coyotes scattered briefly, snarling, regrouping. Greytooth panted, sides heaving, tail flicking weakly with every breath. Then, just as the pack prepared for another coordinated attack, a new sound split the desert. A shrill, cutting cry. The cry of a sentinel. Greytooth froze. The coyotes froze. On the jagged rocks above the crevice, a shadow shifted. A dark shape rose, small, wiry, and watching with sharp, calculating eyes. A desert hawk, its wings half spread, let out a second alarm call, sharper than the first. Its cry echoed across the dunes, bouncing off stone and sand, ringing through the blistering air. The coyotes snapped their heads toward the noise. In the wild, the hawk's cry meant danger, larger predators, shifting winds, or something that would soon turn the odds. Even desperate animals listened when the desert spoke through its birds. The pack hesitated. Just long enough. Greytooth lunged again, kicking with surprising force fueled by fear, fury, and the last embers of strength. His hooves caught the lead coyote square in the chest. The predator yelped, tumbling backward. The others balked, unsure, their ears twitching toward the hawk's warning call still ringing overhead. Then, another cry sounded, this one deeper, closer, a mountain lion's distant roar. The coyotes broke. They scattered across the dunes, slipping into the wavering heat, their tails low, their growls fading into the distance. Hunger might have brought them close, but the desert's hierarchy held firm. There were things even a starving pack didn't want to challenge. Greytooth stood alone, sides heaving, sweat dripping down his legs. He limped toward the crevice, lowering his head to check the entrance. Marley and Willow remained silent but alive. His breath shuddered in relief. He backed away, scanning the horizon to ensure no predators returned. The sun pressed against his back, unrelenting, but he stood his ground, guarding the cubs in the shadowed hollow, fulfilling a debt written not in words, but in instinct and memory. Miles away, Finn's breath hitched again under Lena's care. Lena leaned closer, adjusting the oxygen mask as she whispered encouragement. His pulse fluttered like a trapped bird, but it fluttered still. Two different battles fought beneath the same blistering sky, one by hands of compassion, one by hooves of loyalty, both tied to the same mother running on hope alone. And the desert, harsh and unforgiving, bore witness to all of it. By the time the sun dipped low behind the Nevada ridge, the desert had turned from burning gold to the deep red of a wound closing for the night. Lena stepped out of her kitchen for the first time in hours, her legs stiff and her eyes burning from concentration. Behind her, Finn lay wrapped in warm blankets inside a portable incubator she'd set up on her counter, his breaths thin but steady, his body still fighting the toxins that had tried to claim him. She wiped sweat from her brow and looked toward the fence. Arya was still there. The lioness had not moved more than a few steps since arriving with Finn. Her body sagged with exhaustion, her paws cracked and bleeding from the 8-mile run. But her eyes, those fierce, amber eyes, remained fixed on the house, unwavering and alert, as if sheer willpower alone could reach through the walls and keep her cub alive. Lena stepped closer, crunching across the gravel. "You're still here, huh?" she whispered. Arya's ears flicked toward her, but she didn't rise. Her body trembled visibly. Lena felt a sting in her chest. Anyone else might have seen a wild animal, too dangerous to approach. Lena saw something entirely different. A mother trying not to collapse. She brought a bucket of water and set it on the other side of the fence. Arya sniffed, hesitated, then drank slowly, carefully, as though every swallow risked precious energy she barely had left. When she finished, she lifted her head again, staring at the house, her breath shallow. "I'm working on him," Lena murmured. "I promise." Inside, Finn whimpered, a tiny sound, but enough to reach Arya's ears. The lioness tried to stand, stumbled, then managed to brace herself. Lena stepped back, worried the stress would push Arya past her limits, but Arya held firm. Somewhere deep in the desert, Marley and Willow huddled together under Greytooth's watchful presence. The burro remained beside the crevice through the night, occasionally shuffling his feet to keep predators at bay. His breaths were labored, his body marked with shallow cuts from the earlier fight, but he didn't abandon his post. When dawn broke the next morning, Finn was still alive, barely. His heartbeat had steadied, but he remained weak, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Lena spent the entire day monitoring him, hydrating him, adjusting oxygen, keeping his temperature steady. Every time she stepped to the window, Arya was there, waiting, hopeful, terrified. 2 days passed like this, then 3, then 4. Arya didn't return to hunt, didn't rest, didn't retreat into the desert. She stayed near the fence, her eyes fixed on the house at every sunrise and sunset. Occasionally she paced, exhaustion dragging at each step, but she never left. Lena tried to coax her away, tried to guide her back into the wild for food, but the lioness refused. Arya would not leave until she knew, until she saw. Lena understood more than she wanted to. Even humans have limits. But mothers are different. Each day, Lena fed Finn formula through a tube, careful not to overwhelm his weakened system. She flushed toxins from his stomach, monitored his liver function, and prayed his fragile little body would respond. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the cub improved. His eyes opened wider, His paws twitched with intention rather than convulsion. He even tried to lift his head once, only to collapse against the blanket. But improvement wasn't recovery. Finn would live, but he wasn't ready to leave. Not for weeks. On the 5th day, Arya finally rose from her place by the fence and limped away, not toward safety or shelter, but toward the distant dunes. She paused once, looking back, then disappeared into the shimmering heat. Lena felt a pang of worry slice through her. She knew why the lioness had left. She knew who was waiting. "You have babies out there," Lena whispered to the empty horizon. But Arya didn't return the next day, nor the next, nor the next. Finn grew stronger, slowly. Arya grew weaker, invisibly. Lena stayed awake many nights, thinking of the lioness wandering the desert with no food, no strength, and no certainty that the cub she'd entrusted to a human was still alive. And she wasn't the only one suffering in silence. In the shaded crevice, Marley and Willow grew thin from hunger. They ate the last of the thistle and dried brush Arya had brought. Greytooth kept watch, but even he could not protect them from time. The sun baked the rocks overhead. The desert floor shimmered. Every hour without their mother pressed down on them like another stone added to their fragile shelter. Days blurred together. 1 week, 2, then 3. The desert winds shifted as summer deepened, turning harsher, drier, more unforgiving. Lena found herself staring out at the emptiness every morning, searching for a golden shape she feared she might never see again. Finn, now stronger, pawed weakly at his blankets, his eyes brighter. He nipped at Lena's fingers, his teeth tiny but sharp enough to make her smile. "You're a fighter," she told him, "just like your mama." But even as she said it, fear gnawed at her. Had Arya survived the journey back to her cubs? Had Marley and Willow survived without her? Had she returned to find them alive? Or too late? 3 weeks after the day Arya laid Finn at her feet, Lena sat on the porch at dawn, sipping her coffee, watching heat already rise in wavering lines over the sand. She told herself not to hope, not to expect anything, not to let her heart break if the desert had claimed them. But as the sun lifted above the ridge, something stirred in the distance. A shape, then another, then 3. Lena stood slowly, breath catching in her throat. Her coffee slipped from her hand and shattered on the porch, because there, rising from the haze of heat, limping but determined, eyes burning not with fear but fierce purpose, was Arya, and she was not alone. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the morning haze thinned, revealing the unmistakable silhouette of the lioness crossing the dunes. Arya's steps were unsteady, her frame thinner than before, her ribs sharp beneath her fading coat. Each movement looked like it cost her more energy than she had left, but she kept walking, one deliberate step after another, driven by something deeper than instinct. Behind her, 2 smaller shapes followed closely. Marley, Willow. The 2 cubs stumbled through the sand with uneven strides, their legs weary, their bodies thinner and more fragile than they should have been. Marley walked ahead of Willow, placing himself between her and every shifting shadow, every stirring breeze. Willow limped slightly, her paws raw from the long journey, but her eyes were alert, searching, hopeful, terrified all at once. Lena stepped down from the porch, hardly aware that she was moving. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Arya's journey back hadn't been easy, hadn't been safe, hadn't been guaranteed, but she had returned. Arya stopped 50 yards from the fence, close enough for Lena to see the exhaustion trembling through her muscles, but far enough to keep her cubs behind her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She didn't roar. She didn't snarl. She simply stood there, staring at the house with a fierce determination that pierced straight through Lena. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. And Lena understood it instantly. "You're looking for him," she whispered. "You came back for Finn." The lioness blinked slowly, her tail swaying once behind her. Marley and Willow pressed into her hind legs, peeking around her for signs of danger or hope. Lena took one step toward the fence, then another. Arya did not move. It was the closest thing to trust Lena had ever felt from a wild animal. She turned and hurried toward the house. Inside, Finn stirred as the commotion of footsteps and shifting air reached him. His ears twitched. His tail flicked weakly. Lena scooped him up gently, wrapping him in the soft blanket he had grown used to. His body was stronger now, still small, still recovering, but full of life in a way it hadn't been the day he arrived. "Your mama's here," she whispered. "She came back." Finn blinked slow, sleepy eyes as if acknowledging her words. Lena stepped toward the back door, but stopped halfway. Her hands shook. This was the moment she'd feared and prayed for in equal measure. Returning a wild cub to its mother could go wrong in 100 ways. Arya could panic. The cubs could react unpredictably. Finn might be overwhelmed. But the alternative, keeping him from them, felt worse. "You deserve this," she said softly to him. "All of you do." She carried Finn outside. Arya saw her immediately. The lioness lifted her head, ears pricking forward. Marley and Willow went still, their eyes widening. A low, soft rumble vibrated from Arya's chest. Not a warning, but something closer to relief. Lena approached the fence, her movements slow and gentle. She lowered herself to one knee, bringing Finn closer to the wire. The cub blinked, tilting his head in the direction of the familiar scent drifting toward him on the breeze. Arya stepped forward. Her paws trembled, but her gaze never wavered from the small bundle in Lena's hands. A soft, high-pitched call escaped the lioness. A delicate chirping sound no human would ever guess belonged to a predator. It was the sound meant for her cubs, reserved for moments of comfort and reassurance. Finn's ears perked. He knew that sound. He lifted his head, wobbling, and answered with a tiny, fragile chirp of his own. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's bring him home." She backed away from the fence and motioned toward the small holding gate on the east side of the pen, a space she had reinforced and prepared in case this day ever came. Her hands trembled as she placed Finn inside and gently closed the gate behind him. Finn blinked up at her, confused for a moment. Then he heard it again. Arya's call. Soft, urgent, full of love he remembered even after 3 silent weeks. Lena unlatched the outer gate. It swung open with a metallic groan. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Finn looked at the open space, then at Arya. Marley leaned forward, eyes brightening. Willow chirped softly, encouragement in her small voice. Arya stepped closer, lowering herself halfway to the ground in an unmistakable gesture, the one she had used since the day her cubs were born. "Come home." Finn let out a trembling breath. Then he stumbled forward. 1 step, 2 steps. Then he broke into a clumsy run, paws kicking up small puffs of dust. A cry, raw, bright, and full of recognition, burst from him as he crossed the space between them. Arya surged forward with a strength that defied every mile she had walked. She swept her head down and pulled him into her chest, nuzzling, grooming, checking every inch of him as if she needed proof that he was real, alive, breathing. Finn pressed against her, chirping non-stop, his small body vibrating with relief and joy. Marley and Willow joined seconds later, pouncing gently, rubbing their heads against him, circling him in an excited blur of fur and sound. Finn squeaked under the attention, rolling onto his side as his siblings clambered over him. The 3 cubs tangled together, chirping and mewing, their happiness spilling into the air like sunlight. Arya looked up at Lena, and in that single glance, soft, deep, heavy with gratitude, Lena felt her breath catch again. It was a look that said everything Arya could never say aloud. You saved him. You saved all of us. Thank you." Lena pressed a hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the weight of that silent acknowledgement. Arya turned back to her cubs and touched her nose to each of them, gathering them close. With a final look toward the woman who had kept her promise, the lioness nudged her family toward the open land beyond the fence, and together, 4 bodies moving as one, they began the slow walk back into the desert that had nearly taken everything from them. The wind stirred the sand behind them, erasing their fresh footprints almost as quickly as they formed. But Lena knew what she had witnessed would never fade. A mother had returned. Her family was whole again. And the desert, for once, had given something back instead of taking it away. Arya led her 3 cubs across the fading afternoon light, their small bodies weaving around her legs as though afraid she might vanish again. Finn stayed closest, brushing his head against her chest every few steps, making soft, relieved chirps that trembled with leftover fear. Marley and Willow kept bumping into him, sniffing him, batting gently at his ears, as if making sure he wasn't a mirage that would disappear if they blinked too long. Lena followed them to the fence, stopping several yards back, not wanting to intrude on something sacred. She watched them move, a knot forming in her throat. The desert wind lifted gently, curling around her hair, brushing the back of her neck. A soft reminder that the moment she was witnessing shouldn't have happened, and yet somehow had. A lioness had made an impossible choice, and the world had given her mercy. Arya paused at the ridge where the sunlight fell in red-gold sheets. She nudged Finn again, inspecting him one last time. She ran her tongue over his head, his shoulders, even his paws. Slowly, tenderly, like she was memorizing the shape of him, the smell of him, the feel of him. Willow leaned into her mother's side, eyes half closed. Marley sat proudly next to Finn, tail flicking, his gaze steady and protective. The lioness looked back at Lena. Not long, not dramatic. Just a quiet second, a moment stretched thin with meaning. In those amber eyes, Lena saw gratitude, exhaustion, love, and something deeper than any human word could hold. It was not thanks in the way people spoke it. It was something older, something carved into every creature who had ever fought for its young. Then Arya turned away. With a soft grunt, she guided the cubs toward the open desert. Their small paws kicked up fine dust that caught the sunlight, turning the air around them into a shimmering veil of gold. They walked together, 4 shapes moving slowly, gently, as though the land itself was letting them pass without challenge. Lena stood at the fence long after they were out of sight. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of cub chirps. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the weight of the story she had just lived, the wonder of it settling deep inside her. She knew she might never see the family again, not up close, not like this, but she also knew they were alive, together and whole. That was enough. In the distance, the sky turned the color of burnt amber, matching Arya's eyes. A hush fell over the desert, an unusual quiet, as though the land had exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. Far beyond the ridge, Arya guided her cubs to a small grove of creosote bushes, where shadows pooled like cool water. She lay down, curling her body around all 3 of them. Finn tucked himself beneath her chin. Willow nestled into her belly, and Marley sprawled across her front paws as though guarding the whole family. The cubs ate from a fresh kill Arya had made earlier that day, a rabbit she had taken down despite her weakened state. They tore into the food eagerly, their bellies filling for the first time in what felt like forever. When they finished, the sun had dropped low enough to paint the entire sky in deep oranges and purples. Arya groomed them slowly, her tongue rasping gently across their fur. Willow purred, Marley pressed closer, and Finn closed his eyes, leaning into the warmth. For the first night in 3 weeks, they felt safe, truly safe. Crickets began their evening chorus, and the long shadows of saguaro cacti stretched across the cracked earth. The desert, which had nearly swallowed the family, now felt almost gentle, as though granting them a small corner of peace in an endless sea of unforgiving land. Arya lifted her head once more, gazing toward the distant speck of Lena's ranch. Her ears twitched. A soft huff escaped her chest. Not a call, not a warning, just a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged across species, across fear, across desperation. Then she lowered her head and rested it across her cubs, drawing them as close as she could. Finn burrowed deeper into her chest. Willow curled into the soft fur of her belly, and Marley lay draped protectively over both siblings. Above them, the first star of the night appeared. The desert cooled, and for the first time since the poisoned meat, since the impossible choice, since the frantic run across the burning sands, Arya slept. Her breathing slow, her body calm, her family alive. Back at the ranch, Lena finished putting away the medical supplies she no longer needed. Finn's incubator sat empty on the counter, cleaned and waiting, though she hoped she'd never have to use it again. She stepped outside one last time before nightfall, standing where Arya had stood so many mornings in fear and hope. The moon rose over the desert. The air settled into a peaceful quiet. Lena smiled, not the tired, worried smile of the past few weeks, but a real one. Some stories don't end with loss. Some choices, no matter how impossible, lead back to love. And sometimes, just sometimes, trust given freely can change everything. The lioness and her cubs disappeared into the wild, swallowed gently by the land that had nearly broken them. But this time, the desert didn't take. It returned. It healed. It gave them a second chance, and in that soft, silvered night, somewhere beneath the stars, 4 lions slept in peace, together, whole and safe at last. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the simplest way possible. Drop a 1 in the comments if you felt hope return at the end, or a 0 if it nearly broke your heart on the way there. Your comment, no matter how small, helps more people find these stories. And if you want to walk with me into the next rescue, the next miracle, the next moment where the wild meets the human heart, hit subscribe and stay with this community. There are more journeys ahead, more lives to save, more stories worth telling. I'll see you in the next one.